Finally, the Dynasty update for Total War Pharaoh is here. I'm gonna show you the most anticipated new features on the campaign map, give you an overview of the starting positions and rosters of the new faction. I'm gonna break down lethality and the new battle changes, which are actually massive. And at the end, we're gonna have an honest, non-biased review about the game. Is it good or not? From somebody who's unfortunately spent an unhealthy amount of hours both in Pharaoh and the early access. Before we get on, tell me in the comments what did you like or dislike about the old Pharaoh and what gets you most hype now for the new update. With that being said, it's time to rock. Let's take a look at the campaign map. Now look at the size of this thing. It's not just the old map. A bunch of new territories have been added, stretching from western Greece, updated Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and all the way to northern Elam. This is the biggest campaign map a historical Total War game has ever had. 349 settlements. Let that sink in for a bit. If you really want that global conquest feeling that you know you play Total War for, this is gonna be the perfect map for that. So many cities and territories to just slog through, subjugate, and well, if you're feeling spicy enough, race to the ground. That's what we came here to do. There's a pretty high settlement density, and you might be terrified thinking, how am I gonna reach Mesopotamia? But luckily we have a great river, so sailing here is not gonna be much of a problem. The rest of the map also has sea lanes. When you open the map and you see these like little blue boats, if you sail down these areas, that means your speed is a lot faster, so traveling massive distances is not really a problem. Now, another thing Pharaoh does amazing here is the number of playable factions. Look at this. We got the Egyptians, the Hittites, the Canaanites, Sea People, Mesopotamians, and the Aegean area. That gives us 14 major factions, but that's not it. Let's take a look here. The minor factions give us an extra 25 factions for a total of 39 playables. Think about that, no historical has ever had that many playable factions, and look at the map. Look at the starting position. This gives you so many options on how you want to play the campaign. Do you want to play a more historical version of Achilles? Yeah, now you can do that. Do you want to be the Urartians a few centuries before the Urartians and conquer all of Assyria? Be my guest. Or do you want to recreate the future glory of Phoenicia? All of this is possible now with these new amazing starting positions. You can even be the great Pharaoh Merneptah himself, just please, whatever you do, watch out for grapes. Now let's take a look at every region individually, see what they bring to the game. Greece has to contend with, hey, you guessed it, other Greeks, and the region density is not as bad as it could be. Fighting around here isn't really that annoying, but you won't really interact with other cultures until you get to the Thracians, which are not exactly rushable. Across the Aegean are more Greeks until you can fight the Trojans, aka Luwians, but you can take a cheeky little down tour south. Go down the sea lanes, and would you look at that, you're in Egypt. Gaining control of the sea lanes around Crete is so important for any Greek campaign. They just let you basically take over the Eastern Mediterranean. Speed here is just disgustingly fast. So if you want to interact with the Middle East or Egypt, just sea lane it up. The Greek roster has some amazing heavy infantry perfect for holding the line and killing. They've got monstrous javelins, though their archer game isn't really the best. Decent chariots, very effective light shock units. Troy has to painfully slog through Anatolia. As you can see, the settlement density here is just huge. They get to interact with other Luwians, Greeks, and Thracians if they declare war, but getting to the point of fighting your former Hittite overlords, or any other culture, is gonna take quite a while. The Trojan roster revolves around their insane missile infantry. They're capable of doing so much damage. They've got tanky infantry, most of them lack killing power except the swordsmen, and the warriors, they've got pretty decent chariots overall too, even the skirmish ones. Mesopotamia is teeming with life. So many different cultures and such crazy faction and settlement density. To the west you have the Canaanites, the Hurrians, the Hittites. You're surrounded by a swarm of Akkadians. And to the far east, Elam. This is one bloodbath of a campaign, but that's nothing new for an Assyrian. The Assyrian armies rely on cost-efficient Ashur militia, heavy armored spearmen, and shock infantry. They've also got great mid-tier archers. Cavalry can be a game breaker, especially the horse archers, don't even get me started. Babylon has to slog through a lot of other Akkadians here. Elam is nearby, rich with resources, and people that definitely want your land. There's barbarians to the north and the might of Assyria to deal with to the west. This can get very intense. Babylon relies on a swarm of slave infantry that's basically pretty bad, but they have high armor and high model counts. Light infantry, elite spearmen, and amazing archers and chariots. It's time to show the feature most players are probably crazy hyped about. Probably the second most hyped up feature after the expanded map, the family tree. So here we got the ruling family, and you can arrange marriages here, see your closest relatives. In our case, we married Orestes to Helen because, you know what, I wanted Menelaus to lose even in this universe. Yeah, I'm a pretty bad person, ain't I? When you move over to the Dynasty tree, this is the ruling legacy family, basically. Also, you can see the adopted factions here, and you have the option to exile them. Now, I'm gonna show you something really spicy. When you go to the Dynasty tab, you can see all character titles, you can see your own dynasty, and you can rename it because apparently I just had to be that much of an egotistical maniac. Now, as you see there, the more noble, the more renowned your dynasty is, you're gonna have a lot of buffs when it comes to arranging marriages and getting epic gear to drop. Now, how do you increase this? You can be good at diplomacy and court, very religious, interact with characters, manage your province well, and fight epic wars. Apparently the titles are related to how you perform, so because I had a little rebellion pop up, I'm the Lord of the Lawless. Isn't that just great? I built some temples and I'm apparently the devotee of Agamemnon. Agamemnon, the devotee of Agamemnon. Yeah, you know what? This guy is so self-absorbed, it actually fits perfectly. But not only that. You can see the previous ruling dynasties and their achievements. Because Priam starts as the Wanax of the Aegean. He is the first dynasty. because we smashed them in a war, a second dynasty popped up, culminating with us. And you can see everyone's deeds. You can see how long they ruled and when they died. It's just a fantastic immersion tool. In the Power of the Crown tab, you can see your faction leader and your faction heir, or well, dynasty heir in this case. Now, the only thing I wish is if they implemented the Attila system where your heir could inherit your epic gear, because it's a little bit upsetting seeing them look like random NPCs, but you still get to care about your characters. I finally feel immersed in actually being forced to care about the minor generals. Forced inheritances and marriages are a great way to squeeze some extra resources out of the AI. After a character dies, you're gonna have different ways to honor your memory. In this case, I intentionally pushed Agamemnon down the stairs, and we can honor him by sponsoring the soldiers. We pay some gold, and they're cheaper to recruit and cheaper to keep up. If we sponsor politics, we'll get more legitimacy from battles, so we're just gonna sponsor the soldiers as an example. If you refuse to choose, you basically pay nothing and you get nothing. Some quality of life improvements happen in court. For example, you can give positions to factions. Some of them are gonna be mad you gave them to their rivals, some of them are gonna be happy you gave it to them. Basically, you have to think now a little bit if you care about diplomatical standing. Also, you can't just request favors from somebody you're at war with just like that. If I want to request something from Agamemnon, as you can see we're fighting, he's just gonna give me 10 regard. If they're neutral, they'll give you something like 15, and you can see 20 from friendlier factions. You can also throw people out of court now without plotting, so bye-bye Agamemnon, nobody's gonna miss you. The sea people and other hostile invaders behave like normal factions now, and as an example, some of them will spawn in more historically accurate areas like here in Greece. Once they settle down, you can interact with them normally and you can even vassalize them. The AI is much more aggressive. I've seen them declare wars on me when I'm a very strong faction with a bunch of vassals, so logic? I don't know, but I guess the AI doesn't want to live anymore. One thing I honestly dislike about the Pharaoh'S campaign now is the return of administration. It's just such an unfun mechanic for the player to deal with. Basically, the higher quality of troops you have, the more armies you have, the more settlements and specific buildings you have, they're all gonna increase your administration cap. Now, this will progressively increase the food and bronze upkeep of your units. It's extremely annoying and it does nothing but stop the player from snowballing at certain points of the game. You can counter these penalties by either building smart or just by abusing trade, but it doesn't mean it's good. It's just a headache for the vast majority of the player base. You do get some positives, like for example, less attrition taken on higher levels, even you get faster sailing speed, but at the end of the day, this mechanic is just a headache. If you're asking me honestly for my opinion about the campaign now, it's pretty simple. It got a lot more fun, there's a lot more factions to slaughter, make peace with on the campaign, exchange flowers and diplomatical gifts. Nah, who am I kidding, you're gonna conquer them all. Thanks to the Sea People rework, the AI definitely got a bit more aggressive, so you can expect more wars, and you can expect fantastic options to make other factions your vassals. The return of the administration burden is so annoying, but that doesn't really ruin my enjoyment of the campaign. The fact that the family tree is back in really brings back so much immersion and really lets you care about your generals and family members. You can write your own dynasty now, you can just make up your own headcanon and enjoy. So let's talk about the most important part of Total War, pretty much the whole reason most of us play the game, the battles. This update brought a gigantic overhaul to unit stats, combat, and the addition of cavalry, both of which we'll cover in a bit. But first we gotta talk about the elephant in the room, the bull in the Minoan pottery shop. Okay, listen, I'm running out of Bronze Age animal metaphors here. Let's talk about lethality. So this mechanic excited a lot of players when it was announced, and a lot of them got worried at the same time. So how exactly does lethality work? Combat is still calculated with the traditional formula we're used to, but now, in addition to that, you gotta track lethality. It's visible in the weapon damage tooltip, and essentially, it's the percent chance that an entity, upon scoring a successful attack, will kill the enemy entity in one hit. It doesn't matter if it's full HP or wounded, the soldier will get killed. That was a pretty good description of lethality, I'd say, and if you want to hear more of the science behind Pharaoh, battle breakdowns, history, and entertaining gameplay, why don't you click the subscribe button? So, when you hear this, you're already thinking, does combat have weight behind it now? And the truth is, yeah, you can actually really feel the combat being impactful now. As an older example that I've used in previous videos, you can have a unit of cheap javelins firing on the old Pharaoh version into an unshielded side of a unit, and they'll barely get any kills even if they get the gold value and HP done. It's just not satisfying. Now, with this change, units actually drop like flies if they get touched by a javelin at any point. Some units benefited greatly from the addition of lethality, such as javelins and archers, or units with a higher model count, or shock units. It's just insane actually when you see them in combat. So far it's sounding good, right? But we do have a little bit of a problem. Combat can be inconsistent, and it's the product of some very extreme contrasts. As an example, isolated skirmishes with shock units and ranged units is gonna take 10 seconds or less to resolve. Shielded infantry engagements, if they're matched against the proper tier, can easily drag up to 10 minutes or even more depending on your difficulty. Of course, if you're using tactics, flanking with shock units and javelins, abusing your chariots and cavalry effectively, you can avoid these super long battles. But unfortunately, it kinda does show that the AI can't match the player, but that's a general Total War issue. If you want that true tactical experience, you gotta play head-to-head campaigns or something. With that being said, lethality is customizable in the settings before you start a campaign. So combat has something to offer for everyone. If you like the standard pace, just keep doing what you're doing. If you want battles to be over faster, enjoy abusing shock units and javs. And if you wanna play one battle for 10 hours straight, turn lethality off, be my guest. A lot of the unit changes combined with the addition of lethality actually helped combat so much though when it comes to the diversity of your armies. All weapon types are finally viable. If you played Pharaoh before, essentially you could recruit any melee infantry you wanted, but if you picked axes, you would see a night and day difference. They just flat out outperformed everything. Everything is viable now. Swords are amazing grinding units. Kopesh units are just a fantastic mix. Axes are still great, especially as flankers. Shock units are monstrous now, and combat between them can be resolved in seconds. If you rear charge something, it's game over. Now, when it comes to shock units, one thing I've noticed when playing battles and extensively testing over the course of so-called early access, the armor percentage on a unit is tied to the overall health, the number of entities in the unit. Some shock units, like let's say two-handed clubmen, have a monstrous armor degradation value. Combined with lethality, this just means they demolish high armor units, sometimes before they can recover. Ranged units are pure monsters now. Javelins are insanely broken, and you can just drop dead any unit that you connect with. Now, I'm not sure if they're gonna change anything for the release version, but if javelins launch like this, ooh, it's gonna be nasty playing with them. Archers also got a massive buff with the new changes and the addition of the new shot swapping mechanic. So let's say archers have a pretty standard amount of lethality, like 10%. They're still able to do great damage when they're using the so-called arcing shot, which is the equivalent of regular shot right now. If you switch the archers to direct shot, they get a massive 30% lethality at the cost of a much shorter range. If you have clear vision of the target, if you're uphill, or if you're behind the enemy unit, no mercy. That's all I'm gonna say. Formations seem to have been fixed, which means that you can deploy spearmen in finished ranks, put them in spear wall, and just watch them tank enemy units forever. This makes the majority of them fantastic for defending settlements. Just put them in a choke point and watch them hold the enemy army off for ages. Now that formations are mostly fixed, that also means you can put your units in shield or spear wall for a 100% block chance when it comes to units with decent shields and above. And you can completely counter the enemy's overpowered missiles this way, as long as they're firing at you frontally. And now it's time to tackle probably one of the biggest worries in the update for some people when it comes to units: cavalry. So, we're not talking about the historical factor here, we're very aware of its non-historicity. We're looking purely at gameplay. Is cavalry overpowered? Light cavalry, like the Cimmerian scouts, can't really do anything except killing light units and rear charging. Light cavalry is perfectly fine. Most medium spear cavalry crush light units, and they can do disgusting damage to better infantry, but it needs to rear charge and cycle charge when available. You can't just stick them in close combat and expect them to win without any micro. Even mid-tier infantry can beat a much more expensive spear cavalry unit. But there's one problem here: Kopesh cavalry. So the Assyrians have a disgusting late game unit, the Ashur horse archers. Any faction that controls Assyria and has access to the Mesopotamian royal tradition will be able to recruit Ashur horse masters. Now, these two units have Kopesh, and this is so good against infantry. They're easily able to beat elite infantry even frontally. I'm not joking. This unit is absurdly broken. If you get to the point of recruiting this unit, I don't even know what to say. They're just monstrously overpowered so far. Horse archers are disgustingly broken. It's a night and day difference when compared to, let's say, missile chariots. They will just demolish anything they fire on, and after that they can actually do pretty good in close combat. Now the question on everyone's mind: does cavalry make chariots obsolete? Realistically, most of the cavalry units in the game are not that great. They perform better than chariots in some aspects, but realistically chariots are much better against infantry, even if they require more micro. If you have access to horse archers or Kopesh cavalry, yeah, you'll never use chariots again. But the overwhelming majority of the factions in the game will never come into contact with Kopesh cavalry, or some horse archers. Chariots still have their place on the battlefield. But trust me, once you use horse archers, you'll never go back. Camels have been added, and they're a fantastic supporting unit against cavalry because they massively reduce enemy cavalry morale. Now, they're much weaker in combat than cavalry, so you gotta be very careful when using them. Now that we've seen battles, it's time to actually get down to business and answer the most important question. Is Pharaoh worth it now? Is Pharaoh Dynasties actually a good game? Before we answer that, we have to look at the things Pharaoh does great, the things it does decent, and some things it could honestly use an improvement on. If there's one thing the game nails flawlessly, it's the atmosphere and visuals. The game is peak eye candy, top tier cinema. The cities and battle maps look stunning. Some research was definitely put into the major cities, and you can enjoy exploring Mennefer, Babylon, and the other great cities of the time, even though some of yous might disagree. With the world moving towards the collapse, the visuals in the map change. The atmosphere becomes so ominous, and if you can't feel it, you can definitely see that the world is ending. Now, are you the one bringing the collapse, or trying to bring order back? Yeah, that one's up to you. The units look amazing, and there's a lot of historically accurate assets out there. There's also some time-traveling assets, but in general, all the units just look great. When you try to balance between full accuracy and the rule of cool wins just about every time. You can mix so many cultures on the battlefield. Let's say you can get amazing Greek infantry, Egyptian archers, Thracian skirmishers, and Assyrian cavalry in one army. The sound in the game is on another level. The ambience music is awesome, and the dynamic battle themes are really what you need to get the blood pumping. The sound of bronze hitting bronze is just brutal. And another thing that helps with immersion. Soldiers actually trash talk on the battlefield. Your troops will seize any opportunity to remind the enemy of their, inferior ancestry and drive it home with stereotypes of what they may or may not do in their free time. Here's an example directly from the early access. I was defending a town close to Troy against Mycenae, and one of my soldiers shouted, "We know what you do to bulls, Mycenaeans." Huh? I think both you watching this video and me know what the Trojans meant by this. When it comes to battles, we have a bit of a mixed bag here. On one hand, lethality makes some fights very fast, and certain unit types like javelins and shock infantry are just brutal. And don't get me started on horse archers. If you're min-maxing, you can expect the battles to be fairly short. On the other hand, the battles feel heavy and the troop choice is impactful. Light units, medium units, they're all viable and not just heavies. There's a lot more troop variety than Pharaoh's launch when it comes to battle viability. All weapon types are usable and that's great. Hate it or love it, cavalry has its own flavor and can coexist with chariots, except missile cav. We're not talking about missile cav. Sieges are annoying to fight as always, but formations can make it a bit easier. When it comes to the campaign, the scale of the map is just insane. All relevant cultures of the late Bronze Age and some of the early Iron Age that have interacted with the Eastern Mediterranean are all here. A massive amount of settlements to go through, and a bunch of unique landmarks on the map such as the pyramids or the Great Ziggurat of Ur. An insane amount of native units scattered across the whole world, and if you're somebody who wants to paint the map with your faction color, I guess you gotta catch them all. The game can definitely give you that global domination feeling Total War players love to have, even though for most factions it takes a while to get to the point of fighting a much more different culture. Some areas like Egypt and Anatolia have a high settlement density, so it can become a painful slog to unify it all by conquest instead of subjugating them as vassals. The game has an insane level of customization before you even launch a campaign. You can take any royal legacy or worship all gods or something even crazier. Randomize the start location of all the factions of the map, yourself included. Ever wanted to be Ramses and Greece worshipping Mesopotamian gods? I guess this is your lucky day. Diplomacy can always be made more interactive, but Pharaoh does give you more to do compared to some other titles. Exchanging settlements is back, and this makes it very easy to vassalize factions by giving them settlements in exchange for a fat resource stack. You can also conquer enemy cities and barter them away to their neighbors, just be prepared to stare at some pretty bad border gore. You can build up loyal vassals who will gift you with big resource amounts every few turns and special units. Of course, you can always get backstab, you know, cause the AI can sometimes be treacherous, but hey, we love to live dangerously. When it comes to court mechanics, they're pretty impactful early on, but I honestly wish they had a bit more impact and more interesting interactions in the very late game. The core gameplay loop on the campaign is fine, and it's perfectly accessible to both new players, casual gamers, and veterans. It's engaging enough, but hear me out here, it could be a lot more engaging with city building. You can find some regional differences with occasional unique buildings and landmark outposts typically providing the same effects. But at the end of the day, the cultures are gonna follow the same gameplay pattern no matter if you're playing Greeks or Mesopotamians. Whether it's Ithaca or Elam, you have the exact same outposts. Buildings are the same in all but name in just about every case. Exactly the same major grove buildings and major temples, and if you're a min-maxer, the army diversity is not gonna exist once you get your hands on the best weapon types. Is this a general Total War issue? It is, and it can be expanded on without making the gameplay too tedious. On the contrary, it would add much needed replayability. I feel we've been given the illusion of choice, with city building predetermined largely by the region's resources and the resources acting only as currency. The classic dilemma of whether to spend your gold on infrastructure or building your armies up is watered down by resources like stone, with no value outside of buildings. I want to make interesting decisions with my buildings without getting punished for not min-maxing. When it comes to resources and trade, bartering is nice and allows you to abuse the AI quite easily. It's still not a good enough representation of the trade intensity of the late Bronze Age. Imagine if you had luxury resources that were not only valuable in trade, especially for diplomatic relations and gold, but also to boost your army strength. As an example, horse trading was going very strong in the late Bronze Age, especially in some kingdoms like Ugarit. Being able to trade horses and use them to upgrade your chariots, or trading composite bows and boosting your archers. That could really help out a bit with both immersion and a little bit more interactive gameplay. The Hatshepsut legacy is a perfect example of something that should have been baseline for all factions in the game. If you feel overwhelmed by the current resources and don't want anything more added, this is the perfect solution. It gives you a fun, interactive minigame, and you can just choose all the resources you need, barter at your heart's desire. There are so many legacies in the game that have a great foundation and interesting gameplay as a result, but with a little more love they could truly be something great without overcomplicating things for the player. It would be just another way to show off the depth of the late Bronze Age. You gotta remember this: complexity, ease of access, historicity, and gameplay can coexist peacefully, without one suffering the sins of the others. It's all about the way it's designed. But here's the great part. This game gives modders so many tools to expand upon the potential depth of so many great legacies, outposts, and other features. There are already big overhaul mods in the works, so this game is also highly recommended from the modding point of view. It'll definitely increase the game's lifespan by a big amount. When it comes to tech stuff, optimization is great. The game runs flawlessly, and I have a pretty bad PC, so the only issue is that in the test version, turn times can be a bit long. Hopefully this will be fixed just about on launch or shortly after. It's not a game breaker at all. So, the final judgment. Yeah, that sounded ominous. The game is easily approachable regardless of your Total War experience, and thanks to the multitude of customization options, you can truly make some unique gameplay experiences. Some of the mechanics are amazing and have really cool ideas behind them, like the legacy of Atreus, Hammurabi, and Hatshepsut. Could the mechanics and the building systems be fleshed out more? Absolutely. But you gotta remember that CA Sophia did this update on a non-existent budget in a very short time. When you take the game for what it is, it's good, I'm gonna be honest. It does what it promises, regardless if it's lacking depth in some aspects. It's a perfect tool to get more people interested in the Bronze Age while providing a very immersive experience. Soon enough, you'll have modders working on this game, which will massively extend its lifespan. I'm someone who wanted a Bronze Age game for 20 years at this point, and I bought it regardless of its state. I definitely had phases where I wasn't happy with the release game. It wasn't a bad game, but it wasn't quite the in-depth later Bronze Age experience that I wanted. Now that we have a monstrous map with a huge amount of cultures and a very customizable experience with the addition of the family tree and other features, we finally have a full-scale game. One that is welcoming to new players, hopefully leading to more recognition for a fascinating setting, too often dismissed by those who know little about it. CA Sophia has a lot of passion and talent, but it's clear this update has been underfunded and they didn't have a lot of time to develop it. With more resources, this could have been truly epic. Regardless, it's still a good game where you can wage many epic wars, fight bloody battles, and build your own dynasty that will hopefully survive the test of time. And with this, the video might end, but the dynasty shall continue. It's time to get to play the game for yourselves and tell me what do you think about it once you get your hands on it. There's gonna be a lot more content coming, so stay tuned. I hope you enjoyed this, and any like, share, or subscribing if you're crazy enough is greatly appreciated. More historical videos, more gameplay and educational content is coming right at you, and until the next time...